وسلم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي بإذنه علما. We begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We send peace and blessings upon our final messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Inshallah, in the brief time that we have, alhamdulillah, it's good to be back here at the Breakfast Club. Last time I was here was actually October 7th. And on October 7th, we had spoken about Muslim history mainly, and we focused on two groups. Anyone remember who they were? Yes?
The Crusaders of the Mongols.
The Crusaders of the Mongols. We had focused on how the Muslim civilization interacted with two invaders. One was the Crusaders, a military force that came to attack Jerusalem. Though when we understood it a little bit more, it was more complicated than just getting to Jerusalem. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make that a place of safety and security. Ameen. And we also focused on the Mongols that invaded from the east. And what I wanted us to focus on in that time was that how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of planners. That one led to a military response from the Muslims about one generation later, in which they expelled the Crusaders completely. And the other led to the Muslims the Mongols completely destroyed majority of the Muslim world, up until the city of Cairo. But Islam was never lost. Because at the end of that situation, if I asked you today, how many Mongols, where's the Mongolian Empire? What happened to it? It converted to Islam. Because what happened in that case, with that invasion, it was actually Muslims held on to their faith even though they were being conquered. And they led to what? The hearts of their conquerors changing towards Islam. That victory can be granted in many different ways, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of planners. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be amongst those that believe in the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and that benefit from the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think I can get this set up today. Let me see. Today, inshallah, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. And today what we're going to be speaking about in the brief time that I have is understanding the Quran as storytelling, or understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also as the best of planners, but in a very different way, in the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells a story. And I couldn't have asked Imam Abdullah to recite a better, well, of course, all of the Quran is perfect. But he started the recitation of Quran today with a story, which actually works out perfectly, inshallah, for what we're going to be speaking about. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, if we look at it in terms of quantity, almost 1/4 of the Quran is actually stories of the people of the past. So anywhere between 1/5 and 1/4 of the Quran is stories of the past. And when we look at stories in the Quran, they're actually very different than the way that other religious texts handle stories. They're actually very different even than the way that most of us will encounter a story in other parts of our lives. Where I actually had the opportunity of a couple of years ago going through the story of Musa alayhi salam in the Quran versus Musa alayhi salam in the Torah. I would sit down, there was an interfaith gathering in which I would be describing Musa alayhi salam's story from the Quran, and there was a rabbi who would be describing Musa alayhi salam's story from the Torah. And it was actually quite interesting. The first day, this is what happened, I got up, actually he had got up and he said Musa alayhi salam's entire lineage, and that was the whole first day. It was just like, son of this person, 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 and then it gets to Musa alayhi salam. And it was my turn, so I go up and I start talking about the mother of Musa alayhi salam and how her heart was empty when she had placed the Musa alayhi salam in the basket, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala returned Musa alayhi salam to her so that her heart would become full. That we returned you to your mother so that her eyes may become cool. And then we had the students then have an observation of like, what did you think of these stories? Student raises their hand and goes, his story didn't focus at all on the details, but it focused a lot on the state of the mother of Musa's heart. I took that as the best compliment ever. I'm like, yeah, my book doesn't care about the historical details on this happened on this year, and this happened this year, this happened this year, this person's father of this person. No, my book doesn't care about that. You know what my book cares about? The emotional state of the mother of Musa alayhi salam when she had to make a decision, and then how peaceful she felt when she believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that belief paid off. That's what my book focuses on. That's the stories in the Quran are different than stories elsewhere. And what I want us to do today is have a little bit more appreciation of what that looks like, inshallah. So with that said, I put this together as Quran as storytelling, and just like last time, I have way more prepared than we're going to get through. So I'm going to do my best to just capture this in one surah of the Quran and then give us hopefully some insights on what storytelling in the Quran really looks like, inshallah. So with that said, my disclaimer, we're not going to be able to finish. But this is going to sound like a psychology lesson in the beginning, but that's not my intention in totality. But we do have to appreciate, you and I, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about our creation over and over again in the Quran, where Allah says that Allah beautified the way that Allah created our physical forms. Allah will oftentimes also talk about how you and I are put together in terms of our emotions. خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانَ هَلُوعًا, for example. We were made reactive in some way. And before we jump into the stories of the Quran, I want us to know basics of how you and I respond to things when we hear new information. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made us in a way in which certain things elicit different responses from us. And it's actually controlled by two systems within our body. There is the system of neurotransmitters, meaning how information is passed from one neuron to the next one. It's controlled by neurotransmitters, and I'll go over a few of them in just a little bit. And then by hormones is the other one. Neurotransmitters, without getting too deep into the science, is how you and I interact from a second to second, minute to minute, hour by hour basis. Hormones will control how you and I interact and behave within each other, day to day, week to week, month to month, generally speaking. Meaning that when you feel happy, when news gets to you and makes you feel happy, it's because there are specific neurotransmitters that are actually communicating for you to feel happy. When you are feeling sad, something similar, it'll be a different class of them. When you're feeling anxious and worried, a different class of them. Everyone following me? Good. The ones that we're focusing on here, these are a list of all of them. I'm not going to go through all of them, inshallah. But any combination of these is responsible for human emotions in general. And there isn't a cookie cutter list of like, every person has, if you have this much GABA, this much melatonin, this much serotonin, that you're going to feel this way. Everyone is slightly different. Allah made us all with our own unique footprint. But there are generalities here. And the ones that we're going to focus on particularly are going to be these. Endorphins, I'm going to go over just a few classes of these. Endorphins are a neurotransmitter that a class of neurotransmitters that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has within our system that make us feel good, that it gives us reward after effort takes place. After you've done something really difficult, and then you, like, let's just say you were picking up a very heavy thing, and you put it down, you know that, that relief that you get, that's your mind releasing endorphins. Those of you that drive, when someone is about to swerve into you, but then the last second they don't, you know how you get really worried? And then immediately when, alhamdulillah, you're in safety, that next breath of relief that you get, that's endorphins being released. Which is what? Because of some effort that you put in, you were rewarded for it, your body rewards you. It's that make us feel good neurotransmitter. Norepinephrine makes us alert. Using that same example, when that person was about to drive into you, swerve into you, you know how your blood suddenly rushes to your limbs and time kind of slows down? That's actually norepinephrine being produced in your system. It can also be adrenaline. Glutamate aids in memory production. When you're keyed into something and your body knows I should remember this later, glutamate is what usually leads to that. I'm going to skip a couple of them. Serotonin is going to be an important one. It changes receptiveness of the synapse. Actually, serotonin is oftentimes called the laughing neurotransmitter. Why? Because when you laugh, this is something that happens, that there's an expected outcome, but something else happens instead, so your mind keys in to remember it. That's why when you think about a joke, jokes are pretty easy to remember. because they flip your expectation. So it changes the receptiveness there. Dopamine is oftentimes called the happy hormone, or the happy neurotransmitter, because why? Well, it's released when you eat something sweet, it's released when you do these type of things. It's happiness in general. And the two I want us to be really paying attention to is oxytocin. This is a neurotransmitter that's released by the brain that makes us connected to the people around us. The highest oxytocin that any human being can ever release in their body is actually when a mother is giving birth to her child. Alhamdulillah, I've had the opportunity of seeing that 3 times with my 3 children. And one of the things I can tell you is, I remember my wife was in labor. Any nurse that walked in, and she's in labor, any nurse that walks in, she goes, "Oh, what's your name? Where are you from? Where did you study?" She's like going into all of these long conversations. I'm like, stop! You're the one giving birth, just focus on you. But what was happening? Actually, her mind is releasing a ton of oxytocin in her system. So, she wants to connect with everyone around her, because when we think about it, that's the most practical thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in. Does any mother, as soon as their child is born, even though it causes her so much pain and nearly kills her, does any mother say, "Get that thing away from me, it's been causing me pain for the last 9 months"? No mother does that, right? What does every mother do? Let me see my child, let me hold my child. Because why? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala flooded her mind with oxytocin, this connection hormone. That's what that is. And then the last one that I want us to focus on, I know we've given us a lot so far, is cortisol, stress. Most of us hear this in a negative light, but stress, when you're stressed out of something and you're balancing multiple things, or you're annoyed by something, that's cortisol being released in your system. Why am I giving you all of these? Is because when we want to try to understand stories in the Quran, one of the things we have to appreciate is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was the one who created us in the perfect manner. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows exactly how to use these in order to get a lesson across. Those that study storytelling for a living, there have been a couple of studies produced actually in the late 2000s on this, that what makes a good story. And one of the things that they identified is they called it the magic cocktail of storytelling. And they said that within the first few minutes, if you can get 3 neurotransmitters or 3 feelings induced within a person, that is going to lead to them remembering the story and for that story to actually have an impact. And those 3 are, if you can get a little bit of cortisol, there's stress, they're trying to figure out what's going to happen next. If you can get endorphins, when you reward that stress being put forward. And then the 2 other ones is that you can get serotonin, something funny that makes it memorable, that makes them laugh, and oxytocin, a warm and fuzzy feeling that you get. Like when things just connect and that human emotion hits, you know, like the tears start coming. If you can get that, that is a memorable and good story. Why I'm going to talk about this is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does this with every story in the Quran. I was going to use the example of Surah Al-Qasas today, and inshallah I will, but I could very well use the example that Imam Abdullah recited today with the story of Maryam and Zakaria. So beautiful example. As he was reciting it, I was like, oh subhanAllah, this is happening, and this is happening, this is happening. This will make sense in just a second. But I said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala controls not just the neurotransmitter, but also at the hormonal level. Just to give you an introduction of this is, we'll talk about this at a neurotransmitter level in just a second, but even at the hormonal level, the Prophet ﷺ said to a man who was really anxious, and he said, I don't know, I don't have a job, I don't have a home, what should I do? And the Prophet ﷺ tells him, recite Surah Al-Waqi'ah, and continue to recite Surah Al-Waqi'ah every single night. And the man starts doing this and he feels like, what? Alhamdulillah, his heart is more at bay. And then you wonder, what about Surah Al-Waqi'ah does this? Because if you recite Surah Al-Waqi'ah, it's dealing with the most serious topics that any human being could ever deal with. Jannah, Jahannam, the day of judgment. These aren't things that make you normally calm. What is it about Surah Al-Waqi'ah? Well, actually, I would make the argument, this is, when we're talking about the neurotransmitter and the hormone, this is a hormonal control. Why? Because if you ever recite Surah Al-Waqi'ah, it's dealing with the most heavy topics, but the way it's doing it, it's in an iambic pattern. إِذَا وَقَعَتِ الْوَاقِعَةِ لَيْسَ لِوَقَعَتِهَا كَاذِبَةٌ خَافِضَةٌ رَافِعَةٌ إِذَا رُجَّتِ الْأَرْضُ رَجًّا. It's very balanced, and actually your heartbeat starts syncing to it. So if you can speak about the most difficult things calmly, what's eventually going to start taking place, you will become calm as you recite. That same way. So that would be like if you do this consistently enough, it'll change not just the way that you interact with the specific ayat in that moment, but actually how you interact with the world around you. The Quran can have that effect, but we're going to today look at on it minute by minute how your feelings and emotions go through. It will also start controlling those as well, and that's the neurotransmitter level. Is everyone still following me? Alhamdulillah. Now, we're going to look at this in the form of Surah Al-Qasas, inshallah. And I want you to do this, I'll identify with you specific kind of feelings that you're going through as you're going through them, so we can identify the neurotransmitter. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins, Qasim. Anyone know what that means? No, that's the right answer. Okay. We don't know what that means. So, of course, these are the huruf al-muqatti'at. They're supposed to confuse us, and they're supposed to make us humble. No matter what amount of effort you and I put in, we going to know what those letters mean? No, we don't. It's actually something beautiful that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does to introduce many surahs that puts us in our place. Allah is the teacher here, we're the student, we're not quite going to get this completely. تِلْكَ آيَاتُ الْكِتَابِ الْمُبِينِ. These are the verses of the clear book. Often after Hukm al-Qati'at, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will do, is introduce the Quran. Meaning, you don't quite get it, but there is definite meaning here. نَتْلُو عَلَيْكَ مِن نَبَإِ مُوسَى. We were reciting to you the story of Musa wa Fir'aun bil-haq, in truth, لِقَوْمِ يُؤْمِنُونَ, for a people who believe. So we're already introduced with who are the two major characters that we're going to be talking about, Musa alayhi salam and Fir'aun. Moving on. إِنَّ فِرْعَوْنَ عَلَا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَجَعَلَ أَهْلَهَا شِيَعًا. That indeed Fir'aun exalted himself upon the earth. He was literally standing above the earth, and he was subjugating all the earth around him. I want us to think about this in the form of imagery. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if I was to put together a movie that was describing this, to show this, I would show Fir'aun on some sort of throne. I know we sometimes think of him on like a pyramid or something, but on some sort of throne, and he's looking down on the earth. That's literally the imagery that's found here. And Allah says He actually does something interesting. He makes the people of it shi'an, into faction. يَسْتَضْعِفُ طَائِفَةً. And He keeps oppressing one sector over the other. So if I was to put the imagery back out, He's standing above them, and He's divided people into smaller groups. And He keeps telling people to oppress each other. Meaning, if He oppressed all of them all at once, what would happen? They'd all revolt against Him. But He doesn't do that. He's smarter than that. He goes, you guys oppress them, you guys do this better than this, so you guys oppress them, you guys oppress them, you guys oppress them. So they can't ever unite. If anyone's ever been to Palestine, one of the most odd situations you'll find there, I had the opportunity of spending the summer of 2019, is the people of Khalil are oppressed differently than the people of Yafa, are oppressed differently than the people of Ramallah, are oppressed differently than the people of Nablus. One place is an economic suppression. One place is a cultural suppression. One place is you can't travel wherever you want. Why is that done? So that they can't all unite. They can't ask for one thing. Each one has a slightly different form of oppression, so they can't actually unite in that way. It's an evil system, but it's a very intelligent evil system, and Fir'aun does the same thing. He's oppressing them different ways. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, actually there's one group amongst them. طَائِفَةً مِّنْهُمْ. The worst thing that he does is يُذَبِّحُ أَبْنَاءَهُمْ وَيَسْتَحْيِي نِسَاءَهُمْ. One group he oppresses more than everyone else. He slaughters their sons and he leaves their daughters alive. And already you and I are supposed to be, as human beings, you can oppress a human being in a certain way. You can call me names, you can take away my money, whatever the case may be. But a human being will defend their children. No matter what, do anything to my kids, I'm gonna fight you. This is a group that he oppressed so badly that they don't even have enough strength to stop him from slaughtering their sons and leaving their daughters alive. And leaving their daughters alive is not a mercy. It's actually the worst types of abuses are taking place to their daughters all the time. And they're being suppressed and held down. So Allah paints a very gruesome and severe image of what's going on. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, إِنَّهُ كَانَ مِنَ الْمُفْسِدِينَ. He was definitely amongst those that causes fasad, causes corruption. We start with this introduction. Already, there's supposed to be what? If I was going back to that neurotransmitter chart, I would hope cortisol is one of the things that's coming out there, which is what? What a terrible situation. What a terrible man that's being presented. That he's just shown. And then Allah continues, وَنُرِيدُ أَن نَمُنَّ عَلَى الَّذِينَ اسْتُضْعِفُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَنَجْعَلَهُمْ أَئِمَّةً وَنَجْعَلَهُمْ الْوَارِثُونَ. And we wanted to favor those people who were oppressed in the land and make them leaders and make them inherit the land. Suddenly you're supposed to, remember, if we're going back to this, Allah intends to what? The people who've been oppressed generation after generation after generation, we wanted to make them leaders and we wanted them to inherit all the power that Fir'aun once had. Any sociologists in here would say, when a group of people have been oppressed for a long time and you give them freedom, they're not going to become leaders. You know what they're going to become? Oppressors. You know what they're going to become? They're used to being slaves for a long time. They're just going to become slaves by someone else. That's what tends to happen. So it's like your curiosity is supposed to be, how will Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this happen? So already we're getting into that if we were just stressed out before, now it's, okay, maybe there is something here. We're confused a little bit. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, وَنُمَكِّنْ and we establish them in the land, لَهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَنُرِيَ فِرْعَوْنَ وَهَامَانَ وَجُنُودَهُمَا مِنْهُمْ مَا كَانُوا يَحْذَرُونَ. And we wanted to establish them in the land and show Fir'aun and Haman and their armies exactly what they had feared. And you get some more details in here of, Fir'aun, he's not motivated by any sense of justice. He's actually oppressing them over and over again because he's afraid of them. Interesting. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, and now we're going to change shift completely. وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَىٰ أُمِّ مُوسَىٰ. And we inspired to the mother of Musa alayhi salam, an أَرْضِعِيهِ, to suckle him. Suddenly it's a complete change. We had what? Nations are going to be inherited. You have this massive battlefield or something. And then it zooms into one mother. And she's doing the most private act that you can think of. A mother feeding her child. What's that supposed to invoke within us? Remember I said oxytocin? Like that hormone? Who can't relate to this idea of a mother having a hard time with her child? But not only that, we've already been told what? This man kills babies. This man kills young children. And now she has a young child with her. So suddenly it zooms into her, and we're supposed to be feeling what warm and fuzzy about that. Ardihi, just raise him. Just do what you're supposed to for him. Something beautiful about this as well is on an imagery type of perspective. Sometimes people ask, how do you change corruption in the land that's been oppressive for generations on end? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's answer seems to be, raise one child. Raise one child properly. If one mother can do her job properly of raising a child, Allah can take care of it from there. Raise one child. So there's something beautiful about that. But continue. أَرْضِهِ فَإِذَا خِفْتِ عَلَيْهِ فَأَلْقِيهِ فِي الْيَمِّ. And then, but when you fear for him, throw him into the river. This is supposed to hit us. Anyone who's ever had the experience of being with a newborn and trying to give them their first bath. I've experienced this a couple of times. My wife was going crazy. Why? Because mothers and water don't get along, especially when it comes to their children. No mother is, like, there's almost no water in the sink itself. It's like, no, I'm too afraid, my child might drown in it. She freaks out. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling a mother to do what? Throw your child into the river. Not only that, it's the Nile River. For those of us who know like a little bit of geography, the Nile River has 25 feet crocodiles in it. Basically dinosaurs that are in it. Not only that, the Nile River is one of the only rivers in the world that flows north. The problem with that is because where is it headed? It's always headed towards the house of Fir'aun. And that was actually very purposefully designed. That if you ended up in the river, you'd end up actually where? In the seat of the government. So Fir'aun had actually designed it that way. So if you throw him into the river, it's going from the armies of Fir'aun to actually Fir'aun. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, cast him into the river. And you and I are supposed to feel, how desperate is this mother? How bad is the fate that if she kept him, that she's willing to throw him where? Into the river. But that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands her to do. وَلَا تَخَافِي, and don't be afraid. وَلَا تَحْزَنِي, and don't grieve. Allah gives her these type of glad tidings in that way. إِنَّا رَادُوهُ إِلَيْكِ, we will return him to you. وَجَاعِلُوهُ مِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ, and we will make him amongst the messengers. Or send him with a message, depending on how you want to translate it. So we suddenly, if we're going back to our neurotransmitters thing, we've had what? So far, cortisol, a degree of wonder that we have going on, maybe some endorphins being released, and oxytocin. Then continuing, what do we have remaining still? We still haven't talked about serotonin. What's funny so far? Nothing, right? That's coming, don't worry. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues. That, and the family of Fir'aun, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and the family of Fir'aun, آل فرعون ليكون لهم عدوا. The family of Fir'aun had picked him up so that he would become an enemy to them. Most of us know the story a little bit, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will actually put this forward as well. The family of Fir'aun, the wife of Fir'aun, will actually pick up Musa alayhi salam. He'll go down the river in this little basket, and the wife of Fir'aun will pick him up. إِنَّ فِرْعَوْنَ وَهَامَانَ وَجُنُودَهُمَا كَانُوا خَاطِئِينَ. They were in complete error. I had no idea that this was happening, but what happened? That their family picked him up. وَقَالَتِ امْرَأَةُ فِرْعَوْنَ. And then the wife of Fir'aun, the woman of Fir'aun, she actually picks up this baby and says, قُرَّةَ عَيْنٍ لِي وَلَكَ. She picks up this baby and looks at it and says, oh, this baby's really cute. هَذَا قُرَّةَ عَيْنٍ لِي. It's going to be the coolness of my eyes. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but there's something beautiful about this phrase. It's the tears that you cry when the most happy thing that could happen takes place. The term قُرَّةَ عَيُن would be used by the Arabs if they're actually traveling in the desert and there's a sandstorm and the hot sand keeps hitting their eyes and then they see a place of shelter. So they're like, هَذَا قُرَّةَ عَيُن. This is the coolness of my eyes. Why? Because I can get away from this storm and get into some sort of refuge. You can imagine this woman who's married to what? The guy who's killing babies? Yeah, she's married to him. She suddenly sees this baby and says, he's going to be my escape from all of this terribleness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will describe her as someone who's guaranteed Jannah. The Prophet ﷺ will describe her as one of the four most perfectly created women on this earth. But she looks at Musa ﷺ and says, this is going to be the coolness of my eyes. And she walks up to Fir'aun maybe and says, and maybe the coolness of your eyes. And the emotional intelligence of this woman is actually quite interesting as well. At first she says that, لا تقتلوه, don't kill him. I could imagine that she walks up to Fir'aun and says, look, isn't this baby cute? I'm so happy being with him. You might be happy too. And Fir'aun's maybe looking at the baby, and she first gives the first request, which is, don't kill him. I know the color of his skin is different than ours, but don't kill him. And maybe he's saying, okay. And then she goes a little bit further, Asa, maybe, ay yanfa'ana. Maybe he'll be a benefit to us. And he's going, okay, maybe. And then she goes one step further. Oh, nattakhidahu waladan. Or maybe we can adopt him as a child. Here, I also have to appreciate for a woman, how emotionally intelligent is this woman? You know how they say, like, don't give an inch because they'll take a mile? She went from don't kill him to let's adopt him as a son in the frame of one sentence. So, something beautiful that's just taking place, but this is also supposed to be, remember, we're going back to that neurotransmitters thing. You and I are supposed to be so relieved that what? This baby that we were invested in and caring about, not only is it not going to be killed, now it's going to be raised in a palace. Now it's going to be raised by this amazing woman. What are the hum la yash'urun? And they had no idea what was actually happening. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala returns the frame back to Musa alayhi salam's mother. وَأَصْبَحَ فُؤَادُ أُمِّ مُوسَى. And the heart, فَارِغًا, and the heart of Musa's mother became extremely empty. Because why? She doesn't know what happened to her son. Yes, her son is safe, we know that. But she doesn't know what's happening to her son. Suddenly that oxytocin is supposed to be returning, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, إِن كَادَتْ لَتَبْدِي بِهِ لَوْلَا أَرَّبَطْنَا عَلَى قَلْبِهَا لِتَكُونَ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And she was about to yell out and scream, my baby, where is he? And start really doing that, if it wasn't that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had fortified, or رَبَطْنَا عَلَى قَلْبِهَا, fortified her heart, لِتَكُونَ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, that she could be amongst the believers. And she says in her fortified state to her sister, وَقَالَتْ لِأُخْتِهِ قُصِّيهِ, follow him. Here also we get something interesting, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said the average woman, if she had went through this, would have been completely broken. But not when a woman has belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When she has belief in Allah, she still is able to say this to her daughter, to her other child. She says, قُصِّيهِ, when she sees the basket floating down the river, follow him. And we also have to appreciate here that this other woman is really intelligent as well. The story of Musa Islam is all about intelligent women. Just putting it out there. Like every single character we've been introduced so far who's been good has a couple of qualities associated with them. Which is what? They've been a woman, they've been extremely intelligent, and they've been good. Putting it out there. And we'll talk about how this is parried by another story in the Quran later on. But anyway, she says to her daughter, follow him. And by most accounts, her daughter is supposed to be anywhere between 7 and 10 years old at this point. And why we can infer that is where she's allowed to go versus where she's not allowed to go. I have a 7-year-old at home. And I can tell you, if I tell my 7-year-old, go get your brother pants, you know what she's going to do? She's never going to go, yes, Baba, and go and get it. No, she's going to go, what color? Do you want the warm ones? Do you want shorts? Or do you want pants? Like, she'll ask me every other question under the sun until I finally decide I'll go get it. Because it's going to be too difficult to explain. That's actually not what this little girl does. This little girl, her mother just has to say, follow him. You know what she could have easily said? You mean in the river? You want me to jump in and swim? No, follow him from a safe distance of the land so you know where he's ending up. She doesn't have to tell her anything. She does this. So it already says, for anyone who's like reading into the story, makes me think, well, one, either this little girl is extremely intelligent, which is true, or how mature is this little girl, or how mature has she been forced to be that she knows how to listen to her mother the second that she gives her a command. Amazing. قُصِّهِ فَبَصُرَتْ بِهِ, and she watched him from a distance, عَنْ جُنُبٍ وَهُمْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ, from a distance while they didn't realize it. So she followed him, but not step by step as her mother commanded, from like far away. So she's like watching it go there. She goes to one part of town, and so she can still see it. Then she goes to another part of town, all the way up to the palace. When she gets to the palace, she realizes, oh no, he's in the palace. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues the story. وَحَرَّمْنَا عَلَيْهِ الْمَرَاضِعَ مِنْ قَبْلُ. We had prevented him from all of the wet nurses from before. What's going on here? Well, actually now back at the palace, the scene is, the two scenes are about to bump into each other. At the palace, when the wife of Fir'aun is trying to take care of Musa alayhi salam, and she's trying to find wet nurses, someone who this baby will eat from. And Musa alayhi salam, Allah says that we had made all of them haram. Musa alayhi salam would not eat from anyone other than his own mother. So he was causing a really hard time for them from before. فَقَالَتْ, and who says qalat now? The sister of Musa alayhi salam, this little girl. Allah says that she ends up into that gathering somehow. قَالَتْ هَلْ أَدُلُّكُمْ عَلَىٰ أَهْلِ بَيْتٍ. Can I tell you about the people of a house? Again, how smart is this woman? Who is she referring to? Her own mother. But she goes, you know, I think I might know someone who might be able to have fix this problem for you. يَكْفُلَانَهُ. I think I know them. I don't know their name, but I've heard that they're really good with raising children. لَكُمْ وَهُمْ لَهُ نَاسِحُونَ. And they'll be amazing at giving you advice of what to do next. I think I know where they live, but I'm not quite sure. There's so much ambiguity in this verse that this little girl goes, because if she had said, that's my brother, give him back to my mom, they'd be like, oh, this is Bani Israel, let's get this child over with. No, but she goes, I think I know someone who might solve their problem, and I think I know where they live. So, what happens? Remember how I said we're supposed to, one of the neurotransmitters was about serotonin. We're supposed to be laughing, and it's humorous. Isn't this a humorous situation? That what? One is that a little girl being intelligent already, like a child being mature in a moment that already is supposed to be like, wow, that's surprising. But you and I know something that almost all the characters of this story don't know. That's actually that's the essence of what something funny is you are in on something that someone else is not in on. That's actually supposed to be actually making us kind of laugh and relieved. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then continues, فَرَدَدْنَا إِلَىٰ أُمِّهِ, and we returned him to his mother, كَيْ تَقَرَّ عَيْنُهَا, so that her eyes might become cool. Can you imagine a mother being reunited with her child? And how many circumstances have been taken care of for her? She was worried whether her child is only even going to survive. And now she and her child are united into the palace. And she's now being paid and hired to raise her own child. وَلَا تَحْزَنَ, and so says she wouldn't grieve. وَلِتَعْلَمَ أَنَّ وَعْدَ اللَّهِ حَقًّا, so that she might know that the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is true. وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَهُمْ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ, when most people don't actually know. وَلَمَّا بَلَغَ أَشُدَّهُ وَاسْتَوَى, and then when he, Musa alayhi salam, finally attained his full strength and was raised, آتَيْنَاهُ حُكْمًا وَعِلْمًا, we gave him wisdom and we gave him knowledge. Do most people who are raised in a palace or raised with every luxury that life could imagine, do we imagine that those young men end up being smart and wise? No. We imagine them to be spoiled and just problematic in every way, shape, or form. Allah said we did that. وَكَذَلِكَ نَجْزِي الْمُحْسِنِينَ, and this is how we reward those who excel. Why I wanted us to go through this right now is, and we're not going to go there just now, is that's one story in the Quran. And when you think about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did in this story, is Allah is the best storyteller. You had exactly what you needed to pay attention. You and I are used to storytelling all over the place. It's turn on any TV, a commercial has it. The NFL, when it's trying to describe its team, it tells a story. But they use these exact techniques. When I teach this on campus, I play the first couple of minutes of Finding Nemo. Because in it, you have the same thing happening. Where every story that's memorable tends to do this. You'll have a serious setup, something funny, and then something emotional that hits you. Because then you pay attention. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually does this in every story in the Quran. Because why? Allah knows what a good story is, and Allah knows how to tell the best of stories. This morning, Imam Abdullah, when he recited about the story of Maryam alayhi salam, the same thing happened. Which is what? Allah started off the story about the Bani Israel and how we favored some of them. So it gets you interested in which are the characters that are going to be there. Then talks about what? Suddenly, this woman who says, Ya Allah, whatever's in my stomach, I am going to dedicate it to you. And then she finds out it's a girl, Laysa dhakara ka'untha, a male is not like a woman. That's actually supposed to be kind of funny, that suddenly her expectations were taken out. And then even more so, as Maryam alayhi salam is being raised, Zechariah is now there. And there's a funny moment that exists in which he goes up to her and says, where did you get that fruit from? It's out of season. Maryam alayhi salam says, this is from the fadl of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah gives to whoever Allah will. And then Zechariah thinks about it and goes, wait, if Allah can give her fruit out of season, Allah can give me fruit out of season. And he suddenly starts making dua for what? A child. He's motivated. So he makes dua for his child, and he's blessed with Yahya. Same exact sequence is taking place. Which is what? Again, endorphins, serotonin, oxytocin. Because what? The story becomes memorable in that way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the best of stories in the Quran because they actually get our entire mind engaged in that way. And you'll find this over and over and over again. I wanted to give you just a glimpse of that. Modern storytelling is now catching up and recognizing these techniques. That you do this. This is called, again, I told you that this is the storytelling cocktail. There's another one that has been identified. And that's actually when you want someone to be afraid of something. There's another one in which you have glutamate being released. You have cortisol being released. And then you have GABA being released. That's called, actually, in the storyteller's term, it's called the devil's combination. And terrible term. But it's supposed to be when you want someone afraid about something. Every single time you have a description of the hellfire described in the Quran, it will follow that pattern. Why I'm saying this is, the Quran is the best of storytelling. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said in this book that Allah will use the best of examples and every type of example that's available. You and I are oftentimes just not privy to this. And I share this particularly on campus because this is where I'm just going to give you a preview. We start talking about things like what are good protagonists, what are good antagonists, what are archetypes in literature and these types of things. When we go back to it, the Quran uses all of these magnificently. And I never try to do this. I'll show you what a couple of these slides look like. I'll even use examples like the Lion King. I never do this in order for you to say, you know why you should pay attention to the Quran? Because it's kind of like these characters. No, that's not it. Why are these characters, why are these stories so significant to us? Is because they're using the same techniques that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used. Except they're not doing it as well. These stories have staying power because they're utilizing the same techniques that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually used in the Quran itself. An example I can give to that is the Quran has, if I was to say there's two major villains in the Quran, what are they? Who are they? The two most evil people in the Quran. Fir'aun, good, that's one. Who's the other? Abu Jahl would be the same archetype as Fir'aun, because he's the Fir'aun of our ummah. Nimrud would also be a Fir'aun. Shaitan, right? Shaitan. There's two types of, two major evil characters in the Quran, if I was to put it out there. There would be Shaitan, and there would be Fir'aun. Actually, in storytelling, there's only ever two types of villains that exist. They are the outcast. An outcast is what? They're in a perfect system, but they themselves are flawed. And they're trying to corrupt the rest of the world around them. That's Shaitan to a T. He's in literally the Jannah, and he has angels all around him. He's the corrupting force, and he's trying to make everyone like him. That's the outcast. And then there's the tyrant, which is what? The tyrant, Fir'aun isn't just problematic himself. The Fir'aun is representative of all of the problems of society. That's why, what does Allah not do? Allah doesn't just kill Fir'aun. Because what happens if you kill Fir'aun? Another Fir'aun is just going to be made. That's all that's going to happen. What needs to happen to him? The entire society needs to be changed. Those are the two types of villains that exist. Every single villain that it kind of interacts with does that same thing as well. Same thing we can say about the types of protagonists. There's only three types of protagonists in most stories. There is, well, I don't want to delve too much into this, but even how you respond to these antagonists depends on what they've done. Meaning, when there's a person like the Shaitan, who's out there, who's a corrupting force, what does the protagonist have to do? They actually have to learn responsibility and go back to what they were always meant to do. Which is what? Adam a.s. has to return back to his state of being submissive towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He has to repent. And then it's fixed. But on the other hand, Musa a.s. Fir'aun and the society has been corrupted. He has to rebuild society from the ground up. That's actually a very different type of solution that takes place as a result of it. Why I'm telling you all of this about storytelling in the Quran, and this is again, with the outcast, a hero has to accept their responsibility, ends up being chosen one, needs to accept social responsibility and reform. With the tyrant, they have to accept their individuality. That in this case, the protagonist becomes the outcast and needs to stand up for what makes them different, needs to break social order, and they are the ones who are the rebel or the outcast. Think about Musa Islam's story. He is the rebel. He gets declared as the terrorist and gets declared as this. Why? Because he, in that case, is facing with a tyrant. Why I'm giving you all of this? And I know for some of you are like, well, what does any of this have to do with Quran and getting guidance from it? Is we oftentimes, when we talk about stories in the Quran, we talk about them at like a 5th or 6th grade level. The Quran is much more significant than that, and we need to oftentimes look at it from a higher level or higher lens of perspective to understand the lessons found within it are actually much more significant and much more timeless than we gave them credit for. And a person who goes through the stories of the Quran, where are we here? A person who goes through the stories of the Quran. I think I opened the wrong one of this. Instead of getting the slide, I'll do this verbally instead. It's a full education. That the average Muslim is supposed to be reading the stories of the Quran over and over and over again. And it's supposed to make them actually have a full education of how society works. Give an example. The Quran has a consistent theme of young people feeling estranged from their society, meaning they don't feel like their society represents them. Can anyone tell me a story in the Quran that does that? Ashab al-Kahf? Good. The Quran is supposed to make you more empathetic towards the plight of a woman, that she's going to feel like no one understands her when she's giving birth. Maryam alayhi salam. The Quran is going to talk about a father whose children are not listening to him. A couple of them can move on, right? I heard Nuh alayhi salam. I heard Yaqub alayhi salam with the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, right? The Quran will talk about sibling rivalry. Yusuf alayhi salam. The Quran will talk about a really pious man, but his wife is disobedient. Lut alayhi salam or Nuh alayhi salam. The Quran will tell you about a beautiful and intelligent child whose father is amongst the worst in society. Father or uncle, depending on which opinion you follow, but Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? The Quran will tell you about a person with no power speaking truth to power. Musa alayhi salam, right? The Quran will tell you about a man who's been gifted with everything in this world, but he's still amazing and a righteous leader. Sulaiman alayhi salam, Dawood alayhi salam, right? Why I'm telling you all of this is, what the Quran is supposed to do if you went through these stories properly, is when you and I see a story, or when in our own lives we see what? We see someone having difficulty with their children, you know what we're not supposed to think? Oh, they must have done something wrong. We're not supposed to think that. Did Nuh alayhi salam do anything wrong to be challenged by his children? When we run across someone who's a righteous young person, but their family isn't the best, well, they must have turned, they're going to turn out badly. No, we're supposed to be like, no, I've read the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Sometimes what can happen, there can be a righteous and amazing individual that comes from a family that is very challenged. That can happen. You see someone struggling with something, your circle of empathy is supposed to grow because you were exposed to each of these stories. Because what does the Quran do? Why does it put forward all of these stories? These are timeless situations that are going to happen over and over and over again. The Quran in it, there's about 36 stories in the Quran. 3 of them have parents who are asking for children, but they haven't been blessed with children. You and I are supposed to look at that and say, we need to be really cautious of what? Sometimes we engineer our societies to the point where all we do is focus on, and of course I'm with you in terms of making sure that we have environments where children are going to be raised properly. But what about those who are suffering or trying to have children but don't have them? We oftentimes neglect them. Allah doesn't neglect them. Right? Focus in on it. The Quran will give us story after story after story to also model for us, these are the struggles that human beings will continuously go through. And if a Muslim is reading the stories of the Quran and actually empathizing and relating to them, it's supposed to actually expand their circles of empathy throughout. But that's if you do a deep read of these things. And that's what I wanted to give us a quick introduction to, inshallah. With that, I'll open it up to comments, reflections, or questions. Yes?
You said Surah Al-Waqi'ah was being recited to calm the brother down.
Yeah.
But then the Prophet himself, he said he recited Surah Al-Waqi'ah and it gave him gray hair.
That's in the hadith where it's multiple surahs that did that, not Surah Al-Waqi'ah in and of itself. It's one of them, but it's saying in the entirety of that section of the Quran, we'll do that because of its content. But he didn't single Surah Al-Waqi'ah out in that narration.
So, but it gave him gray hair.
It gave him
so
gray
one
hair.
person it calmed, the other person it gave him gray hair.
Yeah, I don't think there's a real contradiction there. Because just because something is calming doesn't mean it won't mature you. Yes?
So, you talk about the story of Musa alayhi salam,
Mm-hmm.
and we know that towards the end of the story, Harun alayhi salam, his brother, joins him,
Mm-hmm.
and then the story tells about their struggle together.
Yes.
But Harun alayhi salam is out of picture from the beginning.
Yeah.
When Musa alayhi salam's life was at stake, at that time Pharaoh was killing all the wolves. So, do you find any evidence of how does Harun alayhi salam comes into picture towards the end of the story, but not in the beginning? How did he survive? And something.
Yeah. So there's a couple of different parts of it. So I'll repeat the question for those that didn't hear it. And that's that Harun alayhi salam isn't spoken about in the story that we just went over. We had the sister of Musa alayhi salam, the mother of Musa alayhi salam, where was Harun, and we had all of the sons being killed. So how does Harun alayhi salam survive? Well, historically, one of the ways that you understand it is, and this is also based on hadith literature, that Pharaoh wouldn't cause every year's children to be killed. It was every other year, every third year, so that there was still a workforce for the Bani Israel to have because he needs slaves at the end of the day. So Harun alayhi salam would have been born in one of those years where he didn't order the killing of all of the children. So that's one thing. Why was he not mentioned? To me, this becomes a storytelling device. Because Musa alayhi salam's story in the Quran will oftentimes be linked with Yusuf alayhi salam's story in the Quran. Actually, you'll even have in the story of Musa alayhi salam in Surah Al-A'raf that a man will run over to Musa alayhi salam and say, you need to leave town because I see in you the same thing that I saw in Yusuf before you, generations that came before. So they're already linked. But Yusuf alayhi salam's story, Musa alayhi salam's story, is there any mention of Musa alayhi salam's father in the Quran? Not a single one. Is there any mention of Yusuf alayhi salam's mother? No. Is there any mentions of Yusuf alayhi salam's sisters?
No.
There's only mention of Musa alayhi salam's sister. Is there, so all of the Surah Yusuf is all about brothers, men, father. Musa alayhi salam's story is all about mother, sister, foster mother. You have like a parallel happening here. And there's many parallels all the way throughout. Musa alayhi salam's mother makes a dua, return my child to me. Within hours, what happens? Her child is returned to her. Yaqub alayhi salam probably made the same dua, right? Ya Allah, return Yusuf to me, because they both get separated from their parents. Does his dua get answered right away? 40 years later. 30, 40 years later, he returns to it. Musa alayhi salam's story is how the Bani Israel left Egypt. Yusuf alayhi salam's story is how the Bani Israel got to Egypt. There's many parallels between these two things. So I'll say one of the reasons that he is systematically not talked about early on is it's actually to contrast the story of Yusuf alayhi salam in a significant fashion. And it could also, this is where I'll get into the sociological level. Women sometimes have a capacity in a society that men don't. I highly doubt that they would allow a young boy to enter into the palace of Pharaoh. That wouldn't happen, right? If Harun alayhi salam was there. But Maria, she's generally known in hadith literature, the sister of Musa alayhi salam, she's allowed to go. So it'll be those type of parallels maybe. But the actual answer is Allah knows best. Why Harun alayhi salam wasn't mentioned here, but he's mentioned much later. Anyone else? Yes.
There's one part of, well, there's a couple parts of Surah Al-Kahf, right? Like, that really get me thinking sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Remember when Kidder killed that kid?
Yep.
You know, when I read that, I was super anxious. You know, and I can just imagine how, you know, Moses felt at that time. You feel what I'm saying? Yeah, he was kind of confused, like, well, why'd you know, do the shock confused?
Mm-hmm.
You feel what I'm saying? And try to understand, try to wonder why, you know, like, why do you do this? You know?
Yeah.
And especially with the boat as well. Why'd you make the also for the last part, he built that wall, you know, and he's like, why are you doing this for these people? You didn't give us no food.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Then he revealed to him, you know, the wisdom of why he did it. You know, it was a way deeper reason that what was on the surface.
Yeah.
You know, it was, you know, teaching him something. You know, about, you know, being patient. You know, also for me, it taught me about, like, basically, you know, when I see something, you know, it is not clear to me, I ask, you know, basically, why did that happen, basically? You know, what brought forth that action? You know?
Yeah.
That's for me. Oh, and also, you know, when it got into the story of Zulkarnain, I loved how it transitioned to the story. Allah said, basically, let me tell you some of his story, that part. You know, I felt that was very, like a strong, very, like, strong start to any story. Like a very, very powerful start. You know, that's what really got me.
Yeah.
Well, that's about it.
No, Surat al-Kahf will be an interesting place where you have 4 major stories that are told, but each story is a completely different style of story. You have the typical hero's journey that happens with these young people who are estranged from the society, and Allah saves them in a miraculous way. You have a very normal conversation with a poor man and a rich man, but in each of these, what happens, it supplants your expectation. Because why? In a society, most people think young people are problems or young people are solutions. Every program I've ever done about the youth that a masjid invites me for goes, the problems of the youth, this, like all this type of thing. But in this case, what happened? The youth were the reason that literally the entire society was saved, because not only did they get saved themselves, but when they were resurrected 300 years later, Allah says what? They were the ones who settled for those people their debates. When we look at historically the sleepers of Ephesus, they actually become one of the reasons why resurrection is actually kept within Christianity. Because the sleepers of Ephesus, they corrected the theology of a society 300 years after them. Because why? They were good when they took shura before they asked what type of food are we going to get. So there's something beautiful there. Second, when we normally think about it, a rich man and a poor man talking to each other, who do we think can help who?
Rich man.
We think the rich man can help the poor man. That's not actually what happens, right? What happens? The poor man reminds him, all of this was from Allah. Why didn't you say MashaAllah when you entered your garden? Instead, you decided to berate me as a result of it. But what happens? When he loses his garden, he starts then saying, I shouldn't have ever done shirk with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He starts talking like his poor friend. So his poor friend was the reason he was saved, right? So it supplants expectations. Musa alayhi salam and Khidr, who do we think is supposed to understand how things work? Musa alayhi salam, he's a prophet of Allah. But who actually knows what's happening in this case? Khidr. And Khidr oftentimes is supposed to be a representative of the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cause something to happen. There's actually opinions that Khidr wasn't actually a present to being. Meaning that as this was happening, Khidr was made apparent to Musa alayhi salam. This is actually just the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taking place. That what happens? A young person was killed. A boat for no reason sank. A wall that should have fallen down a long time ago didn't fall down. It was somehow fortified. But what was it? Allah had unveiled to Musa alayhi salam, I have actors who are causing all of these things to happen for the greater good that you don't normally see. And then last is Zulkarnain, a completely different type of story. Literal nations are being talked about. A man who Allah gave every sabab, that he could do anything he wanted to, interacts with what? People who are transgressing, he took care of them. People who are doing good, he did well with them. And then gives us an example. How does power interact? Most rulers, as soon as they do something amazing, you know what they say? This monument to me will stand here forever. Build a statue of me right here. You know what Zulkarnain does? Hada min fadli Rabbi. This is from the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It will fall one day. Just like all of us will fall one day. And when my Lord allows that to happen, we all need to recognize that it's only Allah who will last forever. What ruler does that? What do most rulers do? My legacy will live on forever. We have done something that no one will. That's what they say. That's not who Zulkarnain was. So every story is very different. You have a hero's tale. You have a normal conversation like that. You have a very metaphorical story, and then you have a national epic. Each one is a different story. And Allah even says at the end of that surah, we will give in the Quran examples of every type. Those who study storytelling, you look at those are actually 4 archetypal stories that Allah tells in the span of just 100 ayat. It's beautiful in the way that it's done, and each lesson actually confounds and is different than what you would have normally expected from a story or the people who are found within that story. So again, Surah Al-Kahf is a beautiful example of storytelling in the Quran, 4 of them jam-packed into one, and each one is uniquely and distinctly different in the way it's written, the details that are found within it, the characters themselves, and also what the reader can expect as a result of it. I think I see people kind of getting up because the sunrise is past now. Any other last final thoughts, inshallah? If I confused any of you or some of this material is irrelevant, my apologies. Please don't hesitate to come find me, inshallah. But what I'm hoping we got out of this was a deeper appreciation of storytelling, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of storytellers. That my intention is not, whenever I do this type of thing, for you to think that the Quran is relevant because it's like these other stories. No, my intention is the actually complete opposite. Why these other stories have staying power, these random secular stories that we hear, is because they're utilizing the actual techniques that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presented within the Quran itself. Appreciate the Quran more because we don't really appreciate the intricacies and the beauties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has weaved within it. And once we do that, one of the beautiful things that happens is you'll start seeing situations unfold around you and you'll think, Allah told me about it. Allah told me about that. Allah told me about that happening. You'll see people who are going through things in your life and you'll say, oh, this person is like so-and-so, this is what I'm supposed to do as a result. Allah honored them by preserving them, I should honor them as well. It makes us more empathetic and more able to actually care for each other because we respect them, because Allah respected that human situation in the Quran itself. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those who inherit the stories of the Quran more wholeheartedly, who tell stories like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells stories, and who are able to capture these stories in the best of ways so that we can pass this tradition on to the generation that comes after us. Ameen. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.